The Holdovers is a 2023 film directed by Alexander Payne, a director I am not very familiar with, but I do recognize some of his titles. I've not seen any of them. This is his first movie I've seen, and I'm really impressed. I love this movie. It was a great time. Very well realized, I think. It captures a certain atmosphere, a certain relationship extremely well. Three general things I loved about the movie were the aesthetic, both in terms of capturing a good holiday mood, as well as just a very cozy feeling. The way it's, the lit and the way, the music is used, especially, gives such a comforting feeling to the film. We also have the depiction of mentorship throughout the movie, the relationship between Paul and Angus. And then, as well as just the constant sprinkles of humor throughout. It's a very funny movie. I was kind of thinking coming out of it, you could have a takeaway, something to the effect of, this is a movie where just everyone kind of learns the value of friendship. And you could think of it as a pretty generic sort of movie, I think. But I want to argue that it goes a little bit different. It shows a different sort of relationship that's more than just people discovering the value of friendship. It really is about mentorship and kind of the two-way effect it has, both on the mentor and the mentee. So the film has a pretty well-defined visual aesthetic. It's not anything too overpowering, but it is a certain warmness, a little bit of a yellow light to it. Um, I think it's color graded really nicely to give that effect because it's nothing overpowering. It's not, like this yellow light that I have for recording right now. It's something soft. It just gives the frame a little bit of coziness. And then additionally, you've also got like this element of just a little bit of film grain. This is from or it's set in the 70s, I think, if I remember right. Um, but, it's not terribly recent. And I think that helps just like lock it into its time frame a little bit, as well as, film grain kind of has a certain nostalgic feel to it whenever it shows up, in a film as something particularly grainy. You can immediately place it as something a little older. So I think that helps along with the tone to just give you a general feeling of coziness. So this movie starts not actually with either the student or the teacher. It actually starts with the choir, which I thought was kind of an interesting choice. I didn't know much about the movie going in. Basically nothing about it besides that people think it's good. So, I wasn't really sure what to expect with the opening, given, the focus on the choir. It actually kind of reminded me of the opening of Tar a little bit because it had like the kind of musical elements underneath, the blank opening credits, basically. Different movie, though. Very different. So I think the reason it starts off with the choir, the practice, the Christmas songs, it also has some depiction of the town's landscape. For the choir, I think it's kind of establishing like a sort of positive teaching relationship for a baseline. Because the choir master is very encouraging and gives simple feedback. We don't get a ton of time with them, so we don't have a ton of context for the teacher student relationship. But I think from what we see, it just kind of establishes the simple idea of you can be a good teacher succinctly, you can interact with students well while still expecting good things out of them, I suppose you could say. So I think it just gives us a little hint of a positive student-teacher relationship, just to establish a baseline in the movie. And then, of course, it also helps establish the holiday aesthetic. It is very common throughout the film. I mean, there's Christmas music, classic carols throughout, and we start with I think it was "O Little Town of Bethlehem," I believe. Um, that combined with like the Christmas tree that's over to the side, and the landscape shots of the snowy town really just help define the environment. Of course, they're establishing shots, but also establish the holiday aesthetic. Um, the not everyone gets to celebrate white Christmases. I've only experienced probably a couple in my lifetime myself, but nonetheless, we're all aware of Christmas time, snow, depictions in film of that. So I think that whole combination gives us a certain nostalgic bed for the movie to kind of ride on from there. I touched on the music a little bit, but it continues throughout during Basically, every pause, there are a lot of different Christmas carols being sung. Some points, like I think when Paul brings the tree back, I can specifically remember a jazzy rendition of a Christmas song. I don't remember which one. But it's not just carols being sung. Sometimes it's that. During the Christmas party, there's the vinyl records being played with Christmas music. All of it just helps reinforce the setting. It's all nice. I have no complaints about the music. I think they made some really nice choices and just a little bit of stylistic variation so that the sung carols didn't get too old. So I kind of talked about all that within the frame of, establishing comfort, making the movie cozy, giving us a space to live in as an audience. And, it's kind of interesting why comfort might be an important theme in the movie. I'm going to circle back around to why I think that is kind of at the end. But by means of getting there, I want to talk about the way the film depicts mentorship. So the film sets up Angus and Paul as kind of parallel characters. They both interact with people in a very similar way, I would say. They both have a sort of holier than thou, you know, sort of self importance to them. Paul, throughout the movie, kind of interacts as someone who has very smart things they want to say. He says lots of things in Latin. He uses lots of fancy words, makes lots of historical references. Tries to define words for people on multiple occasions, even though those people know the definition of the word he's using already. Angus is, interacting with his peers in a almost know-it-all sort of sense. I think the impression he gives off is that he knows more than them, and I think that's very intentional to match those two up, because they have a similar demeanor to start with, but then they kind of meet in the middle with their own specific variation of their personality type. One of Paul's main characteristics is set up to be kind of his austerity as a teacher, kind of having inelasticity in how he views students, very black and white sort of view of these, people he would consider to be kind of rich, entitled students who haven't had to work for anything, haven't experienced anything bad, etc. in his view. In the one sense, you can kind of see where he's coming from, and it's understandable that, perhaps these kids haven't had to do as much. Perhaps they've had more provided for them than the regular student. Of course, we get Curtis as a stark contrast, because he is also at the school, but he does not come from the same money they do. And he, of course, pays the price by having to go to the military. And that idea is a great contrast to the students and to the ideas that Paul is opposed to. And then, of course, Angus kind of represents that inelastic idea of a rich student that Paul has in his head, which will, of course, be informed by further actions in the story. But before the image of the rich student is kind of modified in Paul's head, it's further reinforced by a couple of the other students that are sticking around. The one student, of course, able to just bail four of them out, from having to spend the holdover there. So the inelasticity, the moral black and whiteness, in a sense, is developed by Paul spending time with Angus. The whole lying thing is, a bit of a through line. Paul kind of sees the utility, of course, it saves his job. And then that's developed on a couple more times, where we see Paul develop his views on lying, in a sense. Angus has an effect on him in the way he views morality. Throughout the story, Angus eventually will gain, a father figure for his part. We learn that Angus doesn't really have anyone, be it friends or parental figures, really, in his life. He certainly views his mother and his father-in-law as being distant, not really wanting anything to do with him. And, Paul represents such an important thing for him, being able to support him, eventually someone who is kind of looking to spend time with him and happy to spend time with him. I think one of the best scenes in the movie is in the restaurant after Angus sees his father, his biological father, and the camera just locks in on his face while the two of them are at the table. I think the important thing about that is you get to see Angus's whole range of emotions, from emotion about his dad, doubts about, whether his parents love him, whether he has any value as a human being. And then you can see that swing of emotions from that to the effect that Paul has on him with his encouragement, with his validation. You can see his face swing all the way from despair to happiness. You can just see the instant effect that having someone whose opinion he's come to value has on his life. And it's really a fantastic scene just to emphasize everything that happened beforehand. You also get kind of a hint at the surprising ways, that a mentor, someone of a different age, might be able to empathize with a mentee in their struggles. The depression meds scene, uh, I can't read the name of it from my notes, but the depression meds scene. It's a little bit funny. It's a nice punchline with Paul, but I mean, what are the chances that Angus thought he would be able to actually share something like that with Paul? You know, who would have thought that they share similar struggles in certain ways? So I think that's just kind of a nod to the unexpected way that a mentor might be able to support someone who they're working with. So, you can obviously see throughout the movie, their spirits are both lifted by the increased amount of time they spend together as they grow to understand each other more and more. There's an initial barrier, an initial hostility, of course, because, I mean, like I said, they're started out as similar people, not kind of willing to respect someone they don't already respect, not leaving room for growth. But eventually they do grow over the course of the movie. I think their progression is convincing. And by the end, or well, I'll say, what, I'll leave out the epilogue. By the firecracker scene, we'll say, because I want to talk about the epilogue separately. By the firecracker scene, it's such a stark change in behavior for both of them. Paul, because he's not miserable, Angus, because he's happily interacting and he looks kind of free. So I think that progression up until the fireworks scene really captures their dynamic powerfully. I was going to go back to this point while I was recording, so I'm just going to do a little quick addendum. First thing was, Paul is accomplishing his goal of affecting the youth, of raising kids with good character, just not in the way he expected. He didn't really expect his job to be fulfilled, or his goal to be fulfilled, by experiencing mentorship in quite this way. He kind of expected that by being strict, by being specific, by enforcing his ideals, that he would be able to produce kids of good character. But what he learns over the course of the movie is that, to mentor someone well, to truly affect someone's life, you kind of have to meet them on their level. You have to invest in them rather than just kind of expecting them to follow a specific path. And then the other thing was how this idea of mentorship ties back into memory, and why everything feels so cozy and why that's so important to the movie. I would say the coziness is important because the movie kind of feels like someone looking back fondly on an important moment in their life. I'm kind of thinking, like, especially the moments spent in Boston, kind of at points feel like they're shot like a home movie in a sense. I think that explains also why the school is so romanticized in a sense. We get a lot of everyday proceedings before school breaks. We see interactions in the dorms. We get the shots of the town in a sort of nostalgic way. But even though, it's not specifically framed like Angus looking back in time, seeing this formative moment in his life, I think that's the general impression I get. It's like someone is thinking back to a moment where they, kind of had a moment of a mentor, had someone who invested in them, who they thought of as a father figure, and they're kind of thinking back on that moment and experiencing it again. But of course, they're not the only two characters in the movie. There is also a considerable amount of time spent with Mary. And I mentioned a little bit earlier Curtis's role, how he kind of represents some of what Paul is angry about institutionally with some of the people he interacts with on a daily basis at the school. I think Mary mainly underscores the value of community because she's gone through a lot. She had her fiance, I believe, die um, around the time the child was born. It might have been before childbirth, but she had her fiance die. She, of course, had her son killed in the war. She has no immediate, uh, no close by family. But yet, Paul checks on her, cares about her well being. I think that's another aspect, by the way, that helps out Paul a little bit. Like we can see he has some genuine kindness in him by the way he interacts with Mary. He just doesn't quite understand how to apply it yet to a student the right way. But anyway, Mary is, she's holding up as best she can. Um, she's still, performing her job well. She's barely holding up. But, even the strongest person will still need someone to lean on sometimes. She certainly shows a lot of strength in being able to carry on through all of that. But yet you have your moments like at the Christmas party where sometimes you just need other people to be there, help you out. Even when you just need time to grieve alone, you'll still need people to support you. And I think her character arc shows the importance of that. She has people in her life who are willing to support her, who are willing to be kind to her, to come alongside her. Love the humor throughout. I don't have a ton of specific jokes written down, um, but I mean, I laughed a bunch at the movie. There are a lot of jokes in the movie. They don't feel like big swings at jokes. They're not like giant setups for jokes generally. It's just little things, the way people say things, the little ways people interact with each other, where a lot of the humor comes from. And I think that's a huge benefit because if there was too big of a focus on the humor, if the movie was taking too much time to set up its jokes, I think that would take away a lot from the impact of the relationships being shown. But this style of humor, where it's almost like just little jabs here and there, um, I think works so much better. Fits in a lot with the general theme and intent of the movie, I think. A couple small gripes with the movie. I don't think it's perfect, unfortunately. A little bit of performance stuff. I was looking up Dominic Sessa, I believe is his name. Angus, the actor who played Angus. It didn't always buy his delivery. It looks like it's his first credit, at least on Letterboxd. And if that's the case, that's certainly an admirable job for a first-time performer. I mean, he did sell a lot of things really well, but I think especially early, kind of the way he delivered some of his stuff didn't really hit for me. Some of Paul's lines felt like a little bit too absurd. This doesn't happen a ton, I wouldn't say, but it's a few times I was kind of thinking to myself, some of these moments with acting don't quite hit right. There are also probably towards the second half of the movie a couple of really weird moments with Dutch angles. Um, I think one was, oh gosh, one was like in the kitchen. Mary was making breakfast or something. Paul was asking where Angus was, and it was a Dutch angle. And then it was almost immediately followed up by a weird like zoom out from the exterior of the school with Paul still looking for Angus, which was really weird stylistically for such a generally restrained movie. I mean, there are not zero moments where it yeah, where it ups the decibels, I guess, like the scene where Angus dislocates his arm is very suddenly intense, I suppose. A couple of those stylistic moments were kind of odd. There's another one. Uh, they're eating out in the dining room, I think, and it's shot at a Dutch angle at a kind of a strange moment. I think it's when Angus is leaving the theater. That makes a little more sense. The camera's like a little bit askew, and sure, you give the audience a sense that something's going wrong. That makes sense, kind of. But yeah, just a couple of weird shot choices I don't understand the utility of. And then just the last thing I want to touch on is the epilogue, because I'm just not sure if I think it's a good choice or not. By the epilogue, I just mean, the everything that happens after the firecracker scene and after we're, zooming out from the window and cut to black. I kind of wish the movie had just ended there, because that's such a emotional payoff, I think, to see them interacting like that, to see everyone happy despite being alone during the holidays. I suppose there's some value in showing the relationship continuing outside of those confines, and it having some impact in real life. Obviously, Paul being willing to sacrifice his job to give Angus a shot is commendable. It's good. It does show that their relationship that they had built up, their mentorship was genuine. But I don't know. At the same time, I'm just not convinced we needed that, because I just think we had already gotten enough evidence during their time together, given the issues they had worked through and the things they had talked about. So I just don't know if we needed the extra time. I don't know. Maybe it would have been annoying to not get any closure on what happened with Angus afterwards, since there were a lot of shenanigans that happened. But I can't help but think like the movie would be better if it had just cut off during the fireworks. This is one of my favorite movies of 2023 so far. I think there might be, well, it'll probably be like number 3 or something like that on my list. So, highly recommend. Very comfortable watch. Would not be surprised if I return to this during future holiday seasons for rewatches. I'm definitely going to buy this when it comes out on physical. If it comes out on physical, fingers crossed. Um, but yeah, check it out. Big fan.